Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Semaphore Uncut, a podcast for developers about building great products. In this new episode, Darko, the podcast host, welcomes Michael Larsen, software tester, advocate, and writer. Michael sheds light on the complex challenges facing the software testing industry today. I hope you enjoy this new episode, and let's dive in.
Today with us, we have Michael Larsen. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Glad to join you.
Great. Can you please go ahead and give us, some stepping stones through your career and how ended up you doing what you're doing right now?
I'm a software testing professional. I have been actively involved in software testing in one way, shape, or form since the early 1990s. My primary goals during the 1980s and 90s after I graduated from high school was to be a professional musician. So a lot of my interaction with computers and dealing with them came from a perspective of studio recording and arranging and all the stuff that went with that. My drummer, who was at the time, he said, "Oh yeah, I work for this temp agency and they got me this sales engineering job and it's been going great. I'll get you in touch with them." They did, and they sent me to Cisco Systems back in 1991. And then I spent 10 years at Cisco, first as a lab administrator, and realizing that I was setting up the test environments for the testers, and I was learning what their vernacular was, and I was helping them with what they needed to do, and started using some of their tools. And they said, "Hey, you know what? You've got an aptitude for test. What do you think? Do you want to possibly come join this new development test team that we're putting together?" "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that." And so that set the ball rolling. I worked for Cisco Systems for 10 years up until 2000. And then I decided for various reasons, I thought, okay, what else is out there? I don't necessarily want to be pigeonholed. Let's see what else we can do. And of course, I made that move right at the time of the dot-com crash. So I told everybody, yeah, I worked for one company for 10 years. And then I worked for 5 different companies, including that 10-year company, in the ensuing 5 years. So very unstable and, but those taught me a lot too. And I learned a lot more about how different companies test, how they view testing, and the value of it. At this given moment, after a 30-year career, I tell people that I am an independent software testing consultant because it sounds better than saying I'm basically unemployed, which is the truth. And I'm not going to put too fine a point on that. A lot of us are in that same position. To the credit, when you don't have a full-time job to depend on, it can start to churn up some really interesting creativity. And part of that creativity resulted in a book that Matt Heuser and I wrote and published back in December called Software Testing Strategies. And if you think I'm going to plug that book while I'm here, you are so right.
Semaphore has released the Flaky Test Dashboard to help you identify unreliable tests in your project. Identify which tests disrupt your pipeline and cost you the most, all in one place. Go to semaphoreci.com/product/flaky-tests-dashboard to find out more.
So book is out for just a couple of months now. How was the reception?
The book is called Software Testing Strategies. It's published by Pact Publishing. It's authored by Matthew Heuser and Michael Larsen, the two of us. And it's split up in 3 parts, basically. And the first part is testing knowledge and skills, things you should know as a tester. And then the second part is software delivery processes and how testing fits into it and what are the things that you should do to be an effective tester in whatever those delivery processes are. We have this section called the puzzle pieces of good testing that I think is very helpful, and it really does address a lot of the challenges that you might face depending upon what model you use. And the point is that one size does not fit all. So instead of talking about, say, set test cases, we talk about recipes. And the idea behind a recipe is, there's a lot of things that you can do that should be set. If you have to set up a bunch of environments, you're going to definitely do that a similar way. That's where a lot of automation comes in. That's where a lot of basic stuff that you need to be aware of. It may change. You need to keep those updated. The recipes need to be current. But once you know how to cook with the recipe, you can start messing with it and you can maybe find out some interesting things. You can change the flavor profile a little bit, or the development environment has changed, and what used to work with the team that you were with before may not work here. That's okay, because if you really understand what goes into the recipes that you've made, you can change and modify them to suit the tastes of what you're working with. The third part of the book, though, that's about the politics of testing and the nature of testing work itself, and the fact that a lot of the time it can be very highly valued, or it can be denigrated, treated like a second-class citizen, and some organizations saying, we don't need testers. Our product is done in such a way that because we use CI, CD, C fill in the blank, and then their quality drops. And so I said, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the difficult people you're going to have to deal with. Let's talk about the difficult conversations you're going to have. Let's talk about the fact that you may be asked to compromise your ethical standards, or somebody might term something in a way to where you're doing what you think is the right thing, and somebody else is misrepresenting your work, and you're getting thrown under the bus when something goes wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, but you're being punished for it. In many ways, you might find yourself in no-win situations, or you might find that if I want to keep my integrity, I might either have to really get into it with the powers that be, or I'm going to have to walk away. And am I prepared to do that? And am I prepared to deal with the fallout of what might happen with that? And we've lived it, and we've been through those things. And sometimes, we've had to say, no, I will not sign on to that. And if you're going to terminate my employment because of this, I'll save you the trouble and I'll hand in a resignation. That third part of the book is what we've received the most interesting feedback from. People said, we don't usually see this in software testing books. Thank you for including it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Usually when I interview people, I ask how they see, some part of the history of their, discipline. And I witnessed, a years where automated testing, was, hyped in some terms, like we don't need testers, or, along those lines. So I want to, poke your brain a little bit on those cycles and ups and downs, and, see how you understand them. And
there's been a lot of hype cycles for lots of things. There's hype cycles based off of technologies that just don't pan out. Or there's hype cycles around technologies that actually work with the way you do things. Test automation has been around for a long time. I remember when Windrunner was the big thing, and Windrunner is going to be the be all and end all, and you couldn't possibly want to do this. Now, interestingly, I was working with a team that was developing their own tools at the time. I'm going way back here, and maybe some people still remember it, but there was Tickle and TK, which was the language of all the software test automation that's at Cisco Systems was built around Tickle TK. And a lot of people would say, that's not going to be necessary. Tools like Windrunner are going to, clean it out. And then people would say, no, there's still something really cool about having ultimate control of this. And so I got a chance to see how that played out. And lo and behold, Tickle TK won out in the end, at least as long as I was there. I can't for the life of me tell you if they're still using it. I'd be surprised if they were. They probably moved on to something else. But it was really wild to see why they chose one thing over the other. And then as I got out into the workplace and saw other people doing different things, I remembered some of those. I said, automation can do a lot of neat things. It can't do everything. And the real, I don't want to say criticism that I have, but I think it's fair, is that automation will give you the paths you know about, that you've already structured, that you can follow reliably, and that you can reproduce regularly. Now, yes, you can fuzz some of that. You can put some data variables in, you can data drive it, and maybe you'll find something. But the interesting work with automation is mostly done once that test is committed and it's put into the chain. Now, you're really not testing anything anymore. What you're doing now is change management. If something changed in the code, you're verifying, does everything still work the same way? This test failed. Now, did the test fail because it was finding out some neat, new, wonderful thing about the product? No, not really. It failed because some underlying element of the code changed, or a library got modified. And by doing that, the thing that the code used to call doesn't do so reliably anymore. So you got to go and fix that. And that's cool and all, but now you're in the change management process. You're not actively testing anymore. The testing that you're doing now is going off and doing other things. And I'm not saying that by doing automation, that work is all invalid. No, it's still valid and it's still important, but you're probably going to find that you're going to reach a law of diminishing returns. Like, you can automate every possible test case, but do you really need to? Should you? Is it worth your time based off of what you're going to get out of it? Now, we would argue if you change something and a whole bunch of tests break, okay, something's brittle here. We need to make sure that we can harden that, or this library is more important than we thought, or, oh gosh, this third-party software that we're using as a glue interface between microservices, they updated it and they changed it, and oh boy, we rely on this a lot. And we don't really test that. We just kind of take it for granted that it's there. So now you've got some other stuff you have to do and work with. And that's what I mean by the law of diminishing returns. At a certain point, you have to say, look, we need to focus on what the critical tests are. Let's make sure those are there. Make sure those are in our pipeline. Make sure that we have confirmed that all works, and then deliver it. And at that point, the whole, well, should we test in production conversation comes up. And I would argue, yeah, you should. If you have a staging environment, no matter how elaborate your staging environment is, it's not cost effective to mirror production exactly. And even then, your staging environment maybe has 1/10, 100th, 1,000th, 10,000th of the users that you might be using in the real world. And your users are going to be doing things either through themselves because they're unfamiliar or impatient or need to get something done and they go about it a different way that you hadn't anticipated, or you get actual bad actors that want to really mess with your system that you just, let's face it, unless you've got a dedicated penetration tester who's really passionate about messing up your staging environment, you're not going to replicate that. You're just not. So yeah, you do have to do some testing in production. You have to see how people are interacting with your product. And also maybe to see if that beloved feature that you spent all this time working on is actually being adopted. And right now we're facing the whole idea that AI is going to change the world and what we're doing. It's entirely possible that if a prompt with ChatGPT can generate more test cases and then can create working code that can run your test cases quicker and better than you can, it's a fair bet that that's probably going to happen. But then my argument has always been, and I'm still an optimist about this, when automation comes along or something comes along that can do the work you used to do, don't look at it from the perspective of, oh my gosh, I'm now out of a job. But instead think, now my brain is freed up to start looking at some of the more thorny issues, some of the more challenging issues. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. It means I'm going to have to think about things I haven't thought about before. I'm going to have to think about challenges that, what value do I bring now that, say, ChatGPT or Copilot can't do exactly what I'm doing? If the answer is nothing, you're in a dangerous position. And I want to encourage every tester out there, no matter what part of your career you are in, always curate your career. Be sure that you are working on something new, interesting, challenging, fun that will help you look at what the next thing is. I've been caught flat-footed. In fact, I would argue last year, that's exactly what happened. A lot of the stuff with AI, I thought, oh, this is an interesting technology. Oh, this is really neat. And then as I realized, oh, I got laid off. Well, that's a real drag. Oh, I got laid off because, and please understand, this is purely conjecture. I do not wish any ill will. I love the company that I worked with. I love the people I was with there. But I honestly do believe I was probably laid off because I've been around a long time. And when you've been around a long time, you get to be expensive. And if a technology can come along that can do a lot of what they feel you can do and save a lot of money, any logical organization is going to do that. That's a real danger. That's a real issue. We're all going to come up against it at some point in time. The question is, what can we do to counteract it? And the only way that we can counteract it is understand what it is, learn about how to use the features that are in it, and then figure out what its shortcomings are. And if you can counteract those shortcomings, can you mitigate them? It's just like we talk about testing. The biggest part of software testing, really, if you get right down to it, is risk management. It's not going through the motions and hammering on the product. What we want to do is we want to understand what are the risks that we face. And do we want to put a lot of time and attention on something that's low risk? Or do we want to put our time and attention on the really high risk areas? And again, if AI can meet those areas and we don't have a compelling answer to help mitigate that risk better than AI can, yeah, we're probably going to find ourselves less than optimally employed, period. So we always have to say, where can we put our brains to the more interesting, challenging, and I would dare say fun side of the product?
Semaphore has released the Flaky Test Dashboard to help you identify unreliable tests in your project. Identify which tests disrupt your pipeline and cost you the most, all in one place. Go to semaphoreCI.com/product/flaky-tests-dashboard to find out more.
From what you have seen in your career, what is usually like the sweet spot for, let's say, new companies when they should, really consider, hiring someone dedicated, taking the role of, software testing and, maybe broadly more quality and so on?
I've had the benefit of working for companies when they were very small, and I've had the benefit of working for companies that have gotten to be very big. The neat thing about those smaller companies, and even 300 people could be a smaller company because you have divisions of labor, right? So if you work for a big company, you might work for a conglomerate, that has hundreds of thousands of people, but you might be on a team that for all practical purposes is a startup unto itself, right? You might be on a team of 10 people tasked with bringing out this new product. Yes, you're doing it under the auspice of a big company, right? And a lot of the risks that a pure startup would face, you're not dealing with. You have the money, you have the realization that chances are, even if this goes south, you'll be assigned to something else. Unlikely that, oh my gosh, if this product doesn't work, you're out in the streets and you're going to have to close the doors. With a small software company, that's a reality. But the neat thing was those smaller companies, I would say probably when you get to the height of about 10 or 20 people that are working there, right? Realistically speaking, everybody's going to have to be wearing multiple hats. So if you are a programmer, you're going to have to be the tester. If you are doing marketing, you're going to have to be doing support. If you are the finance person, you're going to have to be the one doing the training in a lot of the cases. So everybody has to share. It's not likely that you're unlikely as a software tester. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you are unlikely to find a brand new startup with just a handful of people. And they're going to be interested in saying, yes, we want to put the time and effort into developing a dedicated testing role. But if that company's been active for maybe a year or two, and they've gotten some success and they're hiring more and more engineers, by the time they've gotten to the point to where they've got maybe, say, 8 or 10 developers, that's about the point where they're saying, you know what? It might be a good time for us to consider talking to somebody to do software testing.
Going back to the book, maybe just from your side, how would you position the book? What is the main target audience?
Okay, so from our perspective, the main target audience, again, we can look at it from the perspective of the three sections, right? Very likely the first part of the book, which is mostly about software testing skills. If you've been in testing for any period of time, like a year or two, a lot of the first parts of the book might be retread, like, oh, I know all this. And that might be true. But we hope that we've given you a few different things to think about and maybe go, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's a different avenue I hadn't considered. And we have a chapter on specialized testing, because unless you've spent time working with different technologies or working with different domains in testing or working for different industries, if you don't know much about how the modern web is put together, and if you don't know anything about software as a service, or if you don't know anything about microservices and how they interact, you're going to struggle. If you don't know anything about API testing in this day and age, that's problematic. I get it. It's not a difficult thing to pick up. I mean, I think it's just like saying, oh yeah, you can do load testing by firing up JMeter, and you can set a bunch of parameters on it and you can run it. And hey, look, I'm a load testing expert. No, you're not. You fired up a tool, you know how to use it superficially. That's great. There's a whole lot more you need to learn before you can say that you're proficient at it. But it's a start. And in our book, that's what we're saying. We can't necessarily make you an expert on everything, but we're going to give you a broad sample of things to play with and work with and get some experience with and understand how they fit together. And then the second part of the book, how you might want to piece those together. So we want to encourage, yes, testing practitioners, you're our first market, but you're not our only market. I want decision makers. And honestly, I really hope that anybody up in the upper management and C-suite reads part 3. There's a lot of situations that happen because of either power dynamics in testing or, yes, software testers are the ones, or quality assurance. That's one of those fascinating names. Again, quality assurance is just elevating the status of a software tester and giving them a lofty title. If you're not willing to give the testers autonomy and they don't get the chance to make the decisions, or they don't get a chance to be part of early conversations, then no, we can't really assure quality. We can't even really provide you with good testing. I would argue that the time that a tester is most critical is before line 1 of a feature is even written. It should be in that story workshop. When you're proposing the feature that's going to come out, we want to work on this, and here's the coding that we're going to have to do. I sure hope you have either a tester or somebody with a software testing advocacy mindset in that room. And if it's a programmer, developer, or if it's somebody marketing or a product owner, that's fine. But they better be asking testing questions. I need to be there to provoke those requirements. I need to be that ferret, that's that voice in the back of your head that you're annoyed with hearing, but I hope you'll listen, because what I'm going to offer you might save you some pain down the road. And that's where I get a chance to actually change the conversation, if you will. How are we going to go about this? How are we going to test this? Is there going to be an API associated with it? Has it been written? I need to ask what-if questions, lots of them. And I need to really press on, have you thought through what you're working with here? A lot of the time I talk about accessibility. Accessibility is often looked at as, well, okay, that's the feature that we give for people with disabilities, like you can't see or you can't hear or your movement is bad. And so we want to give you some other alternatives. And I think that's the wrong mindset. Everybody can benefit from accessibility enhancement, because every one of us can find ourselves in a disadvantageous situation, and we don't have to be disabled to be in it. A situation can change where an environmental factor is going on to where the way the product was designed before, you don't really have the benefit of that, or it's not going to work very well. You have to now associate with those accessibility options. And if they're not there, that product's going to be hard to use. Also, on the flip side, you can have the most compliant software product. You can do all the work necessary to make the most accessible product on the market. But if it's terrible to use, if people don't like interacting with it, then you've won the battles, but you've lost the war.
Yeah. For people that want to, learn more about you, follow your work and so on, you also have a podcast for a long time.
Yes.
Can you just give us, a couple of pointers where people can, find
I
more?
sure can. You bet. So I am the producer of a podcast called The Testing Show. I don't know if I said that at the beginning, but I'll say it now. I produce a podcast called The Testing Show. It is sponsored by Qualitest. And if you go back on the Wayback Machine or something, or go back to the archives for software test professionals, you can find our earlier podcast, which was This Week in Software Testing. Also, as I said, I am the co-author of the book Software Testing Strategies that is published by Pact Publishing. Yes, shameless plug. I would love it if you would go out and buy it. Matt and I have put together various groups on Facebook and on LinkedIn. We want to encourage, if you've read the book, say, hey, I've got the book. I'd love to join this discussion group with you. And let's go. Let's talk about these things. One final little shameless plug here. If you happen to be a fan of hard rock and heavy metal music, and if you'd like to hear my singing voice, I encourage you to look up the band Ensign Red. That is spelled ENSIGN, the color red. And we're on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Greatly appreciate it.
What a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Make sure to subscribe to Semaphore Uncut on your podcast player of choice so that you don't miss our new episodes. And stay tuned.